Imagine not having an antibiotic to treat your child's pneumonia, or enough insulin for your own diabetes. A nightmare for some, a reality for nearly 2 billion people with no access to medicines, causing a cascade of misery and suffering. Now imagine having a situation like that in the face of a global pandemic. A frightening thought. And yet, that was almost a reality in the years 2020 to 2021, when the world was seemingly connected in a fight against COVID-19. In fact, the early months of the pandemic involved a decided shift in the wrong direction. In the face of global shortages, first China, then France, Germany, and the European Union, and finally the United States hoarded supplies of respirators, surgical masks, gloves, and their own hospital workers. Overall, more than 70 countries, plus the European Union, imposed export controls on local supplies of personal protective equipment, ventilators, and medicines during the first 4 months of the pandemic. That group includes most of the countries where potential COVID-19 vaccines are being manufactured. Such hoarding is not new. A vaccine was developed in just 7 months for the 2009 pandemic of the influenza A virus H1N1, also known as swine flu, which killed as many as 284,000 people globally. But wealthy countries bought up virtually all the supplies of the vaccine. After the World Health Organization appealed for donations, Australia, Canada, and the United States and 6 other countries agreed to share 10% of their vaccines with poorer countries, but only after determining that their remaining supplies would be sufficient to meet their domestic needs. This places countries who do not invest in medicine security in a constant state of jeopardy. Medicine security means that every clinic, healthcare worker, and patient, everyone around the country, has reliable, equitable access to the medicine and supplies that they need to achieve good health. And that is a goal worth striving for. The Tertiary Education Trust Fund is striving to help achieve this goal through its collaboration with the academia and its paradigm shift towards research and development. And that intervention is being handsomely rewarded with results. These are the chronicles of the journey to institutionalize research and development in Nigeria. Hello, and welcome to this edition of TETFund, The Paradigm Shift. I am Stanley Bentu. The threat of drug insecurity in Nigeria dates back to the 1960s, but reached a climax in the 80s and 90s when briefcase importers of drugs created overwhelming situations of chaos, chaotic supply, and distribution of drugs of questionable quality, with the attendant effects of increased morbidity, treatment failures, drug resistance, and even death. The situation got so bad that in 1993, the government had to respond with the creation of the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC. The chairman of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Group of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria in January of 2019 made a case for drug insecurity in Nigeria. He urged the federal government to increase local production of essential drugs from the current 40% to 75%. And beyond that, he demanded that at least 300 billion naira should be injected into the sector to enable players in the pharmaceutical industry to ramp up local production rather than depending solely on imported products. When COVID-19 hit in 2020, like a prophecy fulfilled, TETFund was one of the first organizations to respond.
Universities perform three major strategic functions in society. They are teaching, research, and community development. As a result, and in line with its mandate, TETFund has determined that the academic community must have central and core responsibilities in our national development by activating their roles in community development. Since 2015, TETFund has built on its investment in critical infrastructure with a massive expansion of content component interventions, which include research and development. The idea is to make the physical infrastructures optimally functional by providing the needed grey matter and corresponding R&D infrastructure. The responses of TETFund to the national COVID-19 pandemic targeted interventions in line with the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, now the Presidential Steering Committee. After contributing to the palliative pool as part of its short-term solution, TETFund implemented a medium-term response by commissioning 6 research and development efforts aimed at drug discovery and development of candidate therapeutic diagnostic tools, ventilators and repurposing of drugs to combat COVID-19, leveraging the Nigerian university systems and the R&D institutions. These included NAFDAC, the University of Ibadan, the Usman Danfodiyo University Sokoto, the University of Jos, the Nnamdi Azikiwe University Awka, and the Kaduna Polytechnic. TETFund swiftly identified that there were only 3 countries in Africa which at the time had the capacity for vaccinology, and Nigeria was not among them.
About 4 or 5 years ago, one of the saddest days of my life, we were seated in a meeting that was called in the Federal Secretariat. And we had a room filled with people from international organizations and development partners and other related organizations. We pitched medicine security as the philosophy that should underpin why the Ministry of Health should procure the majority of its pharmaceuticals from local manufacturers. And we gave all the benefits, including health security, medicine security, job creation, all these things I've listed out. It was only, and this was a room that had about 40 people. Obviously, this was pre-COVID. This was a room that had about 40 people. The only gentleman that spoke in favor of our concept was a Senegalese gentleman in his 60s who said, and I quote him, that he has confidence in Nigerian medicines, that for the period he had been heading the United Nations organization for 4 years, that every time he goes to the pharmacy shop to buy his antihypertensive medicines, he always requests for made in Nigeria medicines, and he has never gone wrong. The remaining 39, out of the ones that spoke, all of them argued in favor of importing medications from where they were sourced cheaply because it could provide the highest amount of healthcare for the most amount of people. Where are those people now? COVID has shut everybody up.
Therefore, as part of its long-term response, TETFund structured a special intervention that changed this narrative. 3 national institutions were made priority to develop TETFund and sponsored vaccines. They are the National Veterinary Research Center, VUM, the Nigerian Medical Research Institute, Lagos, and the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development.
COVID opened a lot of people's eyes, but the argument that people put forward for us to look inwards, which they suddenly woke up to because of COVID, people like me woke up to it 10 years ago. I didn't wait for COVID to start arguing for us to manufacture vaccines in Nigeria. Close to a decade ago, I was making that argument. When meningitis came up, we made that argument. There are at least 4 or 5 seminal interviews I had given before COVID came up, before people knew what COVID was, arguing that we needed to manufacture vaccines in Nigeria. And the reason isn't far-fetched. Myself and a few colleagues in PMG-MAN, especially Dr. Okeakba, articulated the concept of medicine security, which argued that unless the people are able to determine how their medicines are produced and distributed, that particular group of people will not be able to ensure sustainable access to high quality, affordable and timely health care for their citizenry.
In 2021, the federal government began the implementation of a COVID-19 vaccine development implementation strategy. The initiative, which is funded by the federal government through TETFund, involves both health and educational institutions in order to accelerate COVID-19 vaccine development in Nigeria. Other institutions, including the National Research Institute for Chemical Technology in Zaria and the University of Jos Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, were added to accelerate the project. During a meeting in Lagos in 2021, the 5 institutions presented their proposals and revealed their activities. By February 2022, the management of TETFund revealed that the huge investment of the federal government in research and development had yielded positive results, with 3 Nigerian universities receiving certification from the World Health Organization, WHO, for advancements to the next stage of their research work. This feat is achieved through the TETFund-funded National Research Fund (NRF) grant in respect of vaccine production, drug development, and gene sequencing.
Now, it's now clear to see just how useful investment in research and development can be to medicine security. Just think about this. Globally, the pharmaceutical industry devoted $83 billion to R&D expenditures in 2019 alone. Now, those expenditures covered a variety of areas, including discovering and testing new drugs, developing incremental innovations such as product extensions and clinical testing for safely monitoring or marketing purposes. Now, that amount is about 10 times what the industry spent per year in the 1980s after adjusting for the effects of inflation. The share of revenues that drug companies devote to R&D has also grown. Now, on average, pharmaceutical companies spent about 1/4 of their revenues on R&D expenses in 2019, which is almost twice as large a share of the revenues that they spent in the year 2000. And that revenue share is larger than that for other knowledge-based industries, such as the semiconductors, technology hardware, and even software. And as staggering as those figures are, that was all before COVID-19. So we have a lot to do to catch up with our more medicine-secure neighbors. The good thing is that we are moving in the right direction, and there is proof of concept. We have even more cheery news about the outcomes of TETFund's intervention in COVID-19. In what can be described as a major breakthrough, the vaccine development efforts, which was sponsored by TETFund, has started yielding results, as the COVID-19 project, sponsored by the fund, would be ready for its first clinical trials in November of this year. Take a look at this report.
For nearly 2 years now, TETFund has intervened, providing funds to the Nigerian academia and other research institutions for the development of a homegrown COVID-19 vaccine. One of the major responses is a mega research grant intervention tagged Accelerated Development of COVID-19 Vaccines using Innovative Technological Approach, which was a collaborative effort involving cluster researchers from 5 different institutions to consolidate problem-solving research and promote innovation in Nigeria. The Vice Chancellor, Usman Danfodiyo University, Sokoto, Professor Lawal Suleiman Bilbis, recently led the team of researchers to brief the Executive Secretary of TETFund, Architect Usman, on the progress made so far. He was the bearer of the good news that the TETFund-sponsored COVID-19 vaccine project would undergo its first clinical trial in November this year.
Usman Danfodiyo University, NIMA in Lagos, NARIT in Zaria, VOM, Better Research Institute in VOM, and the University of Jos in Jos. The 5 were pulled together to come up with the vaccines, and we put our resources. Usman Danfodiyo University and the NIMA in Lagos to come up with DNA vaccine and protein vaccines. NARIT Zaria is to come off with the nanoparticles that will carry the vaccines. University of Jos is to do the animal trial of the vaccines, to consider the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine in animal before we go into humans. VOM to do the human trial and also the synthesis of the machine, because they have the capability to produce the vaccines. Already they are producing animal vaccines, and they are also working toward human vaccine production facilities. Thank TETFund and God, we are giving our best strength, and we said within the 18 months we are going to come off with the vaccine candidate that the nation can try in human clinical trial. We have taken about 6 months now, and we think we are ready to tell the TETFund that the vaccines, before the end of November, the vaccine will be ready for pre-clinical trials.
The team was meticulous in its research, taking to understand the mutations of the virus which causes the disease and taking into consideration factors responsible for the emergence of other COVID-19 variants. In his response, the Executive Secretary of TETFund, Architect Usman, praised the team for the achievement, which he noted was made within the time limit, and considers this a source of pride to Nigeria. He assured that TETFund would continue to assist the cross-cutting efforts of the researchers to ensure the desired goal is achieved.
I want to, at this stage, encourage you to continue this, and then the fact that it's a cross-cutting, collaborative effort, it's something that we welcome. We in TETFund have always been behind it, and this is one initiative we will be proud to continue to support till you get to the end, which is the Nigerian-made vaccine to address COVID first, and then other vaccines to address all the other challenges that we face. So I welcome you. I wish you the best of luck in your meetings with the Ministry of Health, and especially your presentation to this President as well as the foreign investors. I will imagine Gire, you will work closely with them. You will have to, let's also monitor the progress. So either you or one of your staff will accompany them to the presentation of the Ministry of Health in case they require any information or assurances from us. I'm aware that this funding has been reserved, so it is you attaining the milestone to access it. Otherwise, the funding is guaranteed, and whatever support that TETFund is required to give, we stand side by side with you to ensure that that is accomplished.
TETFund awarded 1,250,000 naira distributed to 4 clusters of researchers. One of the clusters, the Vaccine Production Cluster, got a total grant of 450 million naira. The Vaccine Production Cluster was made up of researchers from the National Veterinary Research Institute, VOM, Usman Danfodiyo University, Sokoto, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, University of Jos, Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, Lagos, and National Research Institute for Chemical Technology, Zaria. A presentation by Dr. Bashir Mohammed Bello of Usman Danfodiyo University, Sokoto, revealed that it has become a matter of urgency for Africa to join the rest of the world in the production of its own vaccine, rather than importing 99% of its vaccines. Bello explained that this was the inspiration that brought the team together to form a consortium and put up a strong proposal, which they approached TETFund for sponsorship under its research and development intervention.
Well, so the verdict is in. Investment in research and development works. And this is confirmed by none other than the World Health Organization. If we can come this far with this seed investment of less than ₦1 billion, just imagine what we can achieve if we're to bump up our investment to billions. Now, there are certain challenges that our health industry will have to confront to be able to grow and achieve the levels of importance that are meaningful. Chidi Okoro, the executive consultant of Drugs and Medicaments Nigeria Limited, a retail chain and brands dealer in the pharmaceutical sector, categorized these issues into a few buckets, and I'll go through them. How can we expand access to wholesome medicines and good pharmacy care for many Nigerians? How can we distinguish the practice from the business of pharmacy? How can we work to achieve inclusion of various stakeholders within the industry? How can we get regulators to facilitate the practice and business of pharmacy? Which therapeutic classes and molecules shall we incentivize to build comparative manufacturing advantage over the next few years? Now, all these questions can be answered with a value chain for economic prosperity and good health built from the research and development that emerges from our tertiary institutions. And that is the paradigm shift. Join us again on the next edition of the program. Thank you for stopping by. Good night.